Welcome everyone to today's webinar, part 2 of our series, Demystifying the PCR LCA EPD creation process, standards, tools, and trends. Today's part 2, we're going to focus on LCAs and EPDs, why, what, and how. The background for this series is that not long ago, PCR, LCA, EPD were not words that people generally spoke about, unless you were in a very specific industry like us. Now that decarbonization has become practically a household word, people can't learn enough about PCRs, LCAs, and EPDs, and the industry that we're in can't move fast enough to figure out how do we scale in response to the demand for this type of transparency and the reporting that's going to be required moving forward. So for those of you not familiar with Sustainable Minds, today we are the only end-to-end product transparency solutions provider in the market today. We are a program operator. We publish PCRs and EPDs. We deliver LCA and material ingredient disclosure and carbon accounting services. We deliver training and education, and we've developed and implemented a range of innovative digital reporting tools, which all of these things we're going to talk about today. And by the end of this webinar, it will make sense to you why we have evolved into an end-to-end product transparency solutions provider, because all of the pieces are interconnected. But what you'll also see by the end of this webinar is that product transparency is another form of digital marketing. And we've always had this outlook on product transparency. And so all of our solutions are seamlessly designed to integrate product transparency into product marketing for manufacturers making the investment in transparency to be able to build credibility, preference, and value for their brand. Just to visualize the range of things that we deliver, on the left, you can see those are the documents of our PCR program. We built the North American Building Construction PCR catalog, which you can always go to and check whether a PCR has been published for a particular category. We're going to talk in detail about our type of EPD, which we call a transparency report. It was the first digital EPD published in 2015. And we'll touch a little bit on the transparency catalog today and how all of the transparency that manufacturers are publishing from any program operator, EPDs or material ingredient disclosures, all end up in the transparency catalog, because we are all about rewarding every building product manufacturer for investing in product transparency, independent of which program operators and which material ingredient disclosure programs they work with. We get it all into one place to grow the high performance building industry. So we're going to recap a little bit of what we did in part 1, explaining the PCR creation process and why it's important that PCRs all get created the same way. And we started that webinar 2 just with this series of definitions, which we'll use in a little bit forward in this presentation. We'll revisit some of these definitions, but just for those of you, again, attending for the first time, the EPD creation process really has 4 inputs, starting with all of the technical standards that have been published through the ISO series that then inform the guidance for how product category rules get written and created. Product category rules include the rules for how LCA calculations and the requirements for the content of what goes into an EPD. Those are all in the PCR. Then the life cycle assessment is done, again, in accordance with the rules in the PCR. And the EPD gets published from the results of the life cycle assessment according to the content requirements, again, published in the PCR. So our agenda for today is this recap. I just did the definitions. We're going to talk about the purpose of a PCR, why it's critical they get created the same way, what and who is a program operator. We are a program operator. We're going to look at other program operators' work in this webinar. We're going to take a quick look at the steps in the PCR creation process. And then for anyone who didn't attend the last webinar, you'll be all set to move into this one, picking up on now that you have a PCR, how are the rules in the PCR used to create the LCA and the content for the EPD? What happens in the third-party review process? There's 2 points in the process where third-party review happens. We're going to talk about what does a manufacturer's journey look like? How do you get started? How long does it take? What's involved? And then we're going to dig into looking at EPDs across a range of program operators so that we understand and you understand what is all that content in an EPD and why are they all different? Why are some short? Why are some long? We're gonna look at and really dig into that and get some understanding around that. Then we're gonna look at the Sustainable Minds EPD. Again, we call ours a transparency report. We did this kind of analysis on EPDs that we're gonna show you in number 7. We did it back in 2014 as the research to inform the design of our transparency report to really focus on the types of content that people actually need in an EPD. And then finally, we're going to talk about how the demand for more EPDs is being addressed through the creation of new LCA and EPD calculators. And we're going to talk about the kinds of products that today are appropriate to be modeled and reported through LCA and EPD calculators. And we hope by the end of this webinar, you are no longer mystified about the PCR creation process through the LCA and EPD publishing process. This webinar is getting recorded. You will get a copy of the recording automatically. You don't need to request it. If you would like a copy of the deck, you will need to request that. As you exit, there's a survey. We'd like you to take a minute, if you can, to answer a couple of the questions. We welcome feedback on the value of this webinar. Any questions that you have during the webinar, please put them in the questions panel. Our expert LCA analyst, Ray Lee, is on hand to answer questions in real time that he may be able to answer, and others we will take in Q&A at the end. Any questions that don't get answered on today's webinar, we will follow up with you to answer. And with that, let's continue to dive in. So the purpose of a product category rule and why it's critical they get created the same way. I think everybody knows by now that EPDs are being requested and required by state and federal governments. They're being driven by industry rating systems and organizations' pledges and goals, and major purchasers of buildings and real estate operators are using EPDs to make decisions, as are many other types of organizations. And so this demand is only snowballing and increasing. To create EPDs that actually are comparable and can be used to meet the thresholds that will be set in legislation and in procurement programs, the demand for cradle to grave reporting is becoming increasingly important. With that demand for better cradle to grave reporting comes along with the need to create better PCRs to be able to get those better EPDs. So because EPDs are being used to make big decisions, PCRs all need to be created the same way. So who and what is a program operator? Sustainable Minds is a program operator per ISO 14025. We establish and publish rules for our program. Our role as PCR creators, again, is to create PCRs, publish EPDs, and facilitate third-party review and verification. It turns out any kind of company can be a program operator when they create a program and operate according to the standards. And really, unlike Europe, anyone can be a program operator. So why is Sustainable Minds a program operator? So back in 2014, when we were really digging into LEED version 4's credit for EPDs, and we started looking at how do you use an EPD and how would an architect, builder, contractor, or owner use an EPD to make a decision, we did this big survey of EPDs that we'll show you. We just did it again. So we did the exact same thing 10 years ago to understand why are EPDs different, what content is in them that actually makes them EPDs, why are some short, why are some long. And so again, once we started evaluating EPDs, it all ties back to the PCR. And PCRs have historically also all been different, even though they have to conform to the same set of technical standards. So every program operator's technical program is different. Their PCR template is slightly different. Their governance rules are different, and their EPD templates are different. And so moving forward, because of this tremendous demand for faster and more and better EPDs, it's going to be critical for program operators to adopt common standards and common ways of publishing. Again, because EPDs are being used to make big decisions, PCRs all need to be created the same way. So here's the PCR creation process, and it starts with, if you're a manufacturer and you're wondering if there's a PCR for the products you make, you can go right here to the product category rule catalog for North American building products. This is an old screenshot. We update it monthly, even twice a month. It was updated in May. You can go here and find out if there's a PCR for your products. And then you can contact an LCA service provider to get started, or you can select a program operator to get started, and we'll touch on that in just a moment too. And if there's no PCR, you're going to want to contact a program operator. So the PCR creation process starts out with when you identify the program operator to work with on the PCR, the program operator puts out a public call for participation. From that public call for participation, a PCR committee is formed, comprised of stakeholders and interested parties, LCA experts. It could also be other program operators, suppliers, purchasers. Then the committee works over time to draft the content to establish the rules for that particular product category. It then gets reviewed by an expert panel to make sure that the PCR conforms with all the industry standards. And then that PCR is put out for public comment. If comments come in that require substantive review and change, once they go back to the committee will address those comments. It may or may not require another round of public comment, depending upon the verifier's opinion and how substantive the changes are. And once it's done, it goes out and is published on the program operator's website. That process can generally take anywhere from 4 months to a year. We always aim to get a Part B from Sustainable Minds done in 4 to 6 months. Again, it depends on the complexity of the PCR and the participants, but you need a good PCR to create better and increasingly better EPDs. So Kim, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about now connecting the dots between the rules and the PCR and how they're used to create the LCA and the content for the EPD.
Sure. Can you advance to the next slide? So quickly, just to recap what we touched on during our last webinar, which is that in a two-part PCR format, Part A contains the general LCA requirements that apply to all products, and Part B contains the rules to the specific product category. So the LCAs get created according to those PCRs, combining manufacturer data and other data from your background sources, your LCI databases, to create a science-based analysis of your potential environmental impacts. So that manufacturer data includes things like the bill of materials for the product being analyzed, the transportation distances from their upstream suppliers, and all of the materials and energy associated with the manufacturing process at the plant level. With that data within the LCA modeling software, the data sets are chosen that best represent all of those materials and activities. So that data gets pulled from lifecycle inventory databases like EcoInvent, Sphera, who have detailed information about how those different materials and processes affect the environment, down to region-specific and technology-specific data sets. Then once the model is put together, the LCA analyst will run a specific impact assessment methodology like Tracy, which is developed by EPA. And what that does is it characterizes those individual flows into impact categories. So like global warming, acidification, eutrophication, and others, just to get to those quantified end results. And all of that gets organized, modeled, delivered in the form of the LCA report. And that report will describe all of the assumptions made, all of the data sets that were chosen, the standards that were followed, how energy was allocated to a specific product, any sources of waste, essentially everything that's relevant to calculate those results that will end up going into the EPD. So EPDs in that way can be thought of as the summary report, kind of just turning that LCA into a final public-facing summary. And a lot of that content is again prescribed by the PCR, and I'll go into some more depth about what that actually looks like. So I think the best way to visualize how the PCR is used by practitioners is just by following one actual rule that's prescribed by a PCR, and then seeing how that gets implemented throughout the course of LCA, and then finally through to the EPD creation. So this is an example of the Sustainable Mines PCR for commercial flushometer valves from 2016. And on the page of that Part B form that contains the assumptions for each life cycle stage scenario, one of the things that it prescribes is how much water the product is assumed to use over its lifetime. So the PCR committee worked to set these assumptions based on a combination of several sources to get to the uses per day and then how long that product should last. So after the LCA analyst receives that data from the manufacturer, the next step is to set up the data inventory. So they'll fill in any data gaps, reference their assumptions for those data gaps, and then also reference the PCR to make any additional calculations needed before they can even start building the model. So in this case, the analyst would calculate the total volume of water used over the lifetime of the product. Then after that inventory is complete, the analyst puts all of that data into modeling software. So this is an example showing kind of what the SEMA-Pro model might have looked like, including which data set was chosen to represent water and the conversion of gallons to kilograms to match the input required by that data set. Next steps for the analyst to select an impact category methodology to generate the results that are required by the PCR. So the software generates those potential impact results, in this case over the product's entire life cycle, and then later gets scaled to be presented per the functional unit. So then the next step is just to describe the entire process in the form of that background report. So, any assumptions that you're making, setting the goal and scope, all of your calculation methods, your background data choices, your results, and then your interpretation into that lengthy report. So this is an example page pulled from the public LCA for sanitary fittings, showing how those calculations are made and what exactly was entered into the model. And in this case, the total number of gallons of water was dependent on the gallons per use of that product. So it shows the total volume of water over the modeled life. Then once that LCA report is complete, the results are summarized in the EPD, as well as the assumptions made. So here is the EPD for that same product, which shows that total amount of water used, and then also the table of impact assessment results. So we can follow the same example through to the process of third-party review and verification. So the LCA analyst will submit their LCA report to a third-party reviewer. He generates a checklist of items required by the standards and the PCR that LCA was done to or is seeking conformance to. So in this case, one of those requirements we would expect to be a reference to that operational water use assumption. And the reviewer would check that the calculation was made correctly and then also disclosed in the report. Finally, once the LCA report is approved by the reviewer, the LCA analyst submits the EPD for verification. Then again, the third-party reviewer checks the EPD against a checklist of items required by the PCR and against the fully reviewed LCA report before they provide their final sign-off.
Thank you, Kim. So now that you have visibility into how the rules get created and then implemented along the way, now let's map that to what's happening from the manufacturer's perspective. So again, I'm going to walk through the options for how a manufacturer can get started. You can find an LCA analyst who will help you select a program operator. You have a choice. There are a number of program operators available in North America. You don't necessarily have to go with a single program operator that the LCA analyst recommends. Or you can start by selecting a program operator who will advise on what LCA analyst you should work with. Or the program operator may actually be able to deliver the LCA for you either through contracting or subcontracting to an LCA analyst, or might have their own internal LCA resources. And that would be our situation. You can select Sustainable Minds, who as an end-to-end product transparency solutions provider can create a new PCR if one is needed. We can deliver the LCA either product specific and optimized, ultimately an optimized LCA to get published in an optimized EPD, or an industry average LCA to get published in an industry average EPD. We then create the transparency report, which is published both online. We publish it into the EC3 tool, and we publish it as a PDF. We were the very first program operator to publish every one of our transparency reports into the EC3 tool through using Open API. So both a PDF and a digital version of our EPDs have always been in the EC3 tool. And then finally, to help manufacturers leverage their investment in transparency, we work with the manufacturer to create and publish their listing in the transparency catalog, which is the leading source of high performance building products that meet carbon impact and material health goals, to make sure your products get in front of the right professionals who are selecting, specifying, and procuring products for those high performance buildings. So from a duration perspective, once you identify the program operator and select the analyst and the PCR you're going to use, kicking the project off, it starts with data collection, which can be 1 to 2 months. Then the LCA report, modeling, report writing, and review can actually be generally 1 to 3 months. 1 is a little bit on the brief side. And then the EPD creation, verification, and launch is another 1 to 2 months. So you're going to look at about 4 to 7 months total duration on average from start to finish, LCA to EPD. So let's look at EPDs and how they are not created the same. So we're going to look at a survey of EPDs from different program operators. And I want to kind of manage this expectation about environmental performance, which is what an EPD is reporting. An environmental product declaration is reporting on the environmental performance of a product. So now environmental performance, which is along with material health, are part of the definition of high performance building. And they literally are performance criteria. That said, the primary intent for a manufacturer to do an LCA and a material ingredient assessment is for that manufacturer to gain insights into the environmental and human health impacts over the life cycle of its products, to take that information and drive it back into product development. It's optional to publish a public-facing document like an EPD. So the reason manufacturers are really being driven to publish EPDs is to get selected, specified, and procured on projects so they can continue to grow their businesses in the high performance building space. But people want to do business with brands they trust. So manufacturers who actually can explain what they're doing to improve the environmental performance of their products resonates with people. And think about it yourself, like, how are they actually making higher performing products? That would be good to know, so we could understand, what do these LCA results actually mean in this published EPD. So back in 2014, when we did this survey of EPDs originally and asked the question, how would an architect, engineer, contractor, owner ever use an EPD, which is a technical document, to make a decision about a brand or product? And so we really embraced the need for manufacturers to be able to market and educate about their products, their commitment to transparency, environmental performance, and what they're actually doing to improve. And this is actually critical now that optimized EPDs are a thing. When a manufacturer creates an optimized EPD, which was an invention by LEED, in LEED version 4.1, the manufacturer does actually have to explain how they were able to get performance improvements, not only in global warming, but in several other impact categories, and be able to write about it and explain it, which we thought was a great add to the LEED credits to really motivate people to publish better EPDs. But frankly, we've always believed that content should be in the EPD in the first place. So EPDs have two functions. One is to disclose environmental performance, and the second is to market and educate. Well, it's always been the case that people read EPDs, but now increasingly machines are reading EPDs. And the ability to get standardized content into machines is challenging, and it has been. Machine reading PDFs, every EPD being different. And so now that there is an imperative for EPDs to be the feedstock for digital calculators, comparison tools, benchmark setting and tools, EPDs really do have to be created all the same way, again, from a better PCR to create a better EPD. So let's take a look at EPDs today and what content is in them. So for a document to be an environmental product declaration, or technically ISO 14025 calls them type 3 environmental declarations. That is the actual technical term. EPD is a colloquialism, but we'll stick with EPD for now. So in 14025, there's a section that describes the content that goes into an EPD. And some of it is required and some of it is optional. So product description is required, LCA results reviewed by independent third party is required, whatever is relevant in terms of variation that drives performance, the PCR is going to prescribe that variation and what needs to go into the EPD. Other environmental performance data, that's generally also optional, but required will be prescribed in the EPD. Whatever else you want to tell, as long as it's relevant, that is 100% optional. Now, of course, we're paraphrasing, but it's not that much different than what the standard actually says. I mean, literally says anything else, related to sustainability or environmental programs, as long as it's related to this product. And then finally, issuing party related references is all of the imprimatur of the program operator and the reviewers to indicate that it actually is a third party reviewed LCA and a third party verified EPD according to the industry standards. So let's look at this first example. And I want to stress, before we look at any of them, all of these are good EPDs. They're not bad EPDs. They're good EPDs. They're actual EPDs published by credible, well-known program operators. The intent of this investigation is not in any way, shape, or form to diminish the value or the quality of these EPDs. It is literally just an analysis of what's in them. Okay, so let's start with this EPD from ICCES for this custom painted unitized curtain wall from actually an EBU PCR, a German PCR. So what we did, literally is how we did the analysis. We looked through each EPD, and here's the little key for each of the content types as stipulated in 14025. And we looked through to see what types of content were in the EPD. Now, again, this EPD is 16 pages. So in the first 8 pages, you'll notice there's a lot of description, there's some LCA results, there's a lot of issuing party related references. There's the marketing content is a picture with an introduction to the product. And the last 8 pages is largely the variations that in the modeling, a lot of LCA results, and again, a lot of issuing party related references. So on the right, we literally did, well, let's just call it a back of envelope calculation, applying the, the square pixels that we allocated to that content. So it's really back of envelope, but you can see looking down the right-hand side, the preponderance of content to a particular category. And so, what we found works well about this EPD as a disclosure is that it has a lot of LCA results and variations. A good product description is clear graphics, clear table, displaying that general information, really detailed background information, a lot of issuing party related references, a lot of definitions. One of those pages was just like a huge list of definitions, also very helpful. But note, no marketing or additional info or improvement stories. Here's an NSF EPD. It's 13 pages using the NSF PCR for gypsum panel products. You see some marketing content on page 1. We just called that picture. And page 1, the marketing content, you can see there's a lot of variations. We start getting into some LCA results. And then you see a lot of LCA results and finally the references at the end. So works really well as a disclosure, a lot of LCA results. We found that it flowed really nicely. It read well. It made sense, the flow of the information. But once again, really no marketing, because we called that whole front page marketing, so that's how it got the 6%. Again, the preponderance of content is really the LCA results and the variations that drive differences in the products. The next example is an EPD from SCS using the UL Part B for commercial steel doors and steel frames. It too is 16 pages. We called the picture on the front page marketing. You can see a lot of modeling variations, more modeling variations, more LCA results. 2 pictures we called marketing. And again, here's the results. Works well as a disclosure, great diagrams, and a lot of background information on the LCA modeling, and no marketing or additional info or improvement stories. The next 2 are digitally published, or actually EPDs that are digitally published or from an EPD generator tool. So this is the NRMCA Ready Mix Concrete EPD published through the Climate Earth EPD generator. It's 3 pages. You can see it has all of the elements that you need for a disclosure, no marketing information. But the point is that it's designed expressly as a disclosure. So many concrete EPDs with so many variations. Its purpose is only to disclose. And so in 3 pages, it's good structure and length, clearly presents the data and the modeling assumptions. And it's now in a standardized format for both people and machines to easily read. But okay, no marketing or additional information or improvement stories. This next EPD from Smart EPD for hot rolled coil is the second program operator to publish EPDs as a web page after us. It is one long continuous page. It's not multiple pages on the web. The navigation is in the left panel. And actually, again, you can see, we called the picture marketing information. It has all of the other kinds of content required to be an EPD. And again, it's designed expressly to be a disclosure. And it provides a standardized format for people and machines, but no marketing or additional info or improvement stories. Now, We've shown you EPDs from different program operators to different PCRs, but now we're going to show you EPDs from the same PCR, one published by UL to their own PCR Part B for building envelope thermal insulation products, and then we'll show you a transparency report that we did for the same PCR. So here we go, it's 28 pages. And what's important to know about this particular EPD is that they're reporting 4 different products, you can see here, and they've reported them as multi-product weighted averages, which means that instead of, and this is, you can do this as an alternative to a product-specific and plant-specific EPD, if all of these products are manufactured at pretty much all the same plants with different quantities of ingredients, ISO 14025 allows you to average results from different products, different plants, and report it as a multi-product weighted average, calling out highs and lows and with some other guidance around it. So it's 28 pages. You can see here's the front page, calling that marketing info and introduction. This is a picture. This is calling out performance features of the product. So some good marketing info. A lot of modeling variations, again, because it is a multi-product weighted average. And then a lot of LCA results, but again, one set of results because it's a multi-product weighted average. And then a lot of issuing party references. So this is a content-rich EPD. It works great as a disclosure. Again, good graphics, detailed background, meaningful and understandable data visualization, but no marketing or additional info or improvement stories. So let's take a look at the Sustainable Minds Transparency Catalog for this spray-on insulation system. It's 4 pages. It's 4 web pages. And here's page 1. It tells you the name of the product. And here's what all 4 pages look like. And you can see it's really a patchwork quilt of different content types and quite a lot of product marketing information. Images, performance information. Actually, this is where we start talking about what the manufacturer is doing to make a higher performing product to make the LCA results make more sense. Here we provide all the information about how this EPD and this type of EPD contributes to the Green Building Rating System credits. This page 4, this is our innovation in EPD standardization. Because every PCR is different and requires different amounts of different kinds of LCA and variation data, and you've seen the different types of data, because we wanted to keep a standardized format so that people could read any transparency report and find the exact same content types on each page in the exact same place. And so it could be read by people and by machines. What we've done is for every transparency report we do to a PCR that is not one we wrote, we take all the content required by the PCR that is not content that we have deemed to be standard in our 3-page format. We put it on a page 4. So it's really like an appendix. All the additional content is on that page 4, and that's where you end up seeing a lot of variability. I'm going to show you another example. And then our standard page 3 is where the manufacturer can tell their stories about what they're doing in any one or more of the life cycle stages that are being reported, about what they're doing to improve or create higher performing products. And because this is an EPD, all of these claims need to be verified. So the folks doing the third-party verification will require bills of lading or receipts or whatever it is to support any kind of claim. But what you're getting here now is an actual credible story with real data to support the public claims they're making in the market. So if you look at the calculation, you can see that a pretty high percentage of marketing content and standardized 4 pages contains all the information required for an EPD, so has all the disclosure requirements, but it's really been designed to be an efficient and comparable marketing tool, always delivered in the cloud, in PDF, and in the EC3 tool. So how are those 2 EPDs created from the same PCR so different? And what's different about them is that there's a lot of optional content in the UL EPD that the LCA provider determined they wanted to include in the EPD, which they can. It's optional, but it's not content that we chose to include in our transparency report because we provide the LCA background report as a downloadable PDF from every transparency report. So it's a publicly available LCA. Some of the content is allowed to be redacted if it's going to disclose any proprietary information. But all of that background information is available in the LCA report if somebody really wants to dig in and understand all of the assumptions, all of the variations, everything that's in the report. So just quickly, the transparency report, we've been evolving it over time, but we were psyched it won an award in 2015 when we first introduced it. It's easy to apply a manufacturer's corporate identity and branding to make it feel and look like it's from that particular manufacturer. Again, we have 3 standard pages. Transparency reports can be plant and product specific. They can report multiple plants. Each plant will get its own tab. We've done industry average transparency reports. We've done optimized transparency reports, which works great because here right on this page, we embed the rationale and the data about how improvements were made and what the percentage performance improvement was relative to an industry average or the product specific EPD. Just to give you some insight into how every PCR is different, this is our page 4 from another UL PCR for mechanical, specialty, thermal, and acoustic insulation products. There's a lot of additional content required. So this page 4 is super long. And frankly, when you turn it into a PDF, it adds many pages to the document. Here in the footer of the transparency report, again, Kim showed you this. It's easy to see that each step was verified, what it's been verified to, and then this is the content required by lead to be on page 1 of every EPD so that the reviewers can ensure that it meets all of the requirements of lead. And again, what's unique, because this is a web document, is we link directly to the PCR so people can get to the PCR if they want to read it and compare it. And then here's the publicly available and downloadable life cycle assessment report. You probably aren't surprised that we are introducing our Sustainable Minds Transparency Report EPD Lite for all the info needed for a great disclosure, for people and machines to read, and to be able to take in data through Open API and export through Open API. And so now folks working with us will have a choice of a full transparency report, marketing tool, or if really all that's needed is a disclosure, we have that option available as well. So let's talk a little bit about what's coming down the pike that you're hearing more about, LCA and EPD calculators. And Kim, I'm going to throw it over to you.
Sure. So like any project, really the first step in building an EPD generator tool is to identify the scope. So what kinds of products will the tool be created for? Which PCR will it follow? And so typically tools are built for a specific product or product category or for a specific manufacturer. So the first step of the process then is to collect LCA data that covers all possible raw materials that could be used to create the products, all possible manufacturing processes, all possible supply chain regions, really to capture all possible data input scenarios. And like a traditional LCA project, the model is then built with all of that primary data in mind, using the chosen LCA modeling software, pulling from the most relevant LCI databases. And then once that model is built, it can be used to generate the results required by the PCR for a specific product. So those results are then captured in the EPD, which, depending on how the tool was built and how it accepts user input data, is generated automatically in the form of the digital format like OpenEPD or ILCD plus EPD, or in the form of a PDF. So all things considered, these generator tools are really best for products that have a short list of possible ingredients with supply chains and a low variation in manufacturing techniques. That's because every time you introduce a new variable or a new variation, it needs to be accounted for in the model. So that can make using and updating the tool a little more complicated, especially when it's meant to cover products that can be made with different materials or by using different manufacturing techniques, or the list of possible raw materials used in that product type is vast. So think additives, different applications, type of product add-ons, or it's hard to just capture one or a few common supply chains for that product category. And I think it's important to think of this from a reviewer's perspective. So if there are only a handful of possible inputs which are expected to be within some certain range, it's much easier for that reviewer to verify the correctness of those EPDs since there's low variation amongst them. But if each EPD is expected to have very different bills of materials, different ways the product gets manufactured, different steps, different supply chains from different regions, every one of those variations has to be verified for correctness, which again makes the review process similar to traditional LCA and kind of like needs to be reviewed on a one-time per EPD basis. For that reason, we can reasonably assume that what the outlook is for these tools. Currently, they're being used for simple products, have a low variation across the production stage. And then the next step for these tools will be to take on products that have only a slightly more complicated production process or bill of material. So the generator tool technology is expected to evolve from there. Once EPA adds more product categories to its initial list, the demand for EPD generator tools is expected to increase. However, at this point in time, it still does make the most sense to do traditional LCAs for a lot of, and I would say most products. You can still introduce many of the shortcuts that the EPD generators use in a traditional model instead, where you can model a process at the manufacturer plant level, identify common raw materials used at that plant, and then kind of tailor your LCA background report to the studied products that you really need EPDs for. But regardless of how the EPD gets generated, it is the program operator's responsibility to publish EPDs that come to them in any format. So now that also means formats generated from these new tools. And since the number of EPD generators is expected to grow, program operators really need to ensure that the quality of these additional EPDs is held. And with EPD data getting pulled through the API, they need to be machine readable. And the answer to ensuring that consistent format, quality, and machine readability is digitization.
Thank you, Kim. So in summary, this is why better PCRs are needed to create better EPDs. So recapping what we learned today, and in part one, there's more demand for EPDs that are cradle to grave in scope. Because the demand for cradle to grave scope EPDs, PCRs must be created to report cradle to grave. Program operators must publish EPDs in standardized formats for both people and machines to read, and that you have a choice of program operators. And now you can think about the type of EPD that your organization, wants or needs. So that's it for today. There's a third part in this series focusing on digital tools and trends. Now that we've created EPDs, you understand how EPDs get created. Now, how are EPDs going into other tools to do whole building LCA or early stage calculation tools? How is that data getting into them? We're going to look at what's happening in the EC3 tool, the very first digital EPD tool, and go through how they've really been successful in getting other program operators to also add their EPDs to the tool. They've created and are working with this open EPD standard and trying to get that to be more broadly adopted, again, a digital standard format. And we're going to look at the transparency catalog now with Project Builder and Library, where we have always included every building product manufacturer anywhere in the world publishing EPDs for the North American market with access to those EPDs. And we're going to show you how Project Builder and Library is now providing a collaborative workflow solution to any kind of organization who has the need to build a knowledge base of high performance products and the products used on projects. So to really be able to save time, preserve knowledge, meet pledge and goal commitments, and ultimately build an actually higher performing built environment. Thank you for your time today. Appreciate you spending it with us, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Have a great day.